Hello and welcome to the lecture on chapter number 7, which is on leading small groups. We're going to look at many theoretical perspectives. In chapter 6 lecture on group culture, we looked at Mean Girls and used that as a guide to understand some of the more theoretical concepts. We're going to follow suit here as well. We're going to use 1990s cartoons, my generation, maybe not yours. I know I'm getting older and my students are getting younger, but we're going to use 1990s cartoon to explain some of these principles of leadership. There's a lot to cover in this chapter, so let's jump right in. First, we've got to recognize that leadership is all around us. Leadership is something we all cite as being important to the small group process, but when you think about it and you look at small groups, it can be a little difficult to identify who the leader actually is. I mean, think about Scooby-Doo and the gang. Who's the leader? I mean, is it Scooby? The show's named after him. Is it Fred? I mean, he tends to kind of take the leadership role. Who's the leader? It's difficult, isn't it? Who really is at the end of the day? A lot of times, this problem manifests because we have some misguided views on what leadership really is. So let's, for example, look at the Magic School Bus. Hopefully you're familiar with this television show. Who is the leader here? Well, I would argue it might be Miss Frizzle. Let's define leadership. It's influence exerted through communication that helps a group achieve goals. In terms of the Magic School Bus, the goal is to explore the world, expand their territory, and solve some problem. Now, each of them takes a leadership role. Each of the students takes a leadership role, but Miss Frizzle really emerges as the leader, doesn't she? I mean, she's got the power. She's the teacher, right? Well, let's not confuse leadership and power. Those are actually two different phenomena. Power is defined as the power to influence the behavior of others, often through rewards and punishment, expertise, legitimate title, or personal attraction. Now, think about Rugrats. Who has the power? I would say probably Angelica. She's the most abusive. She tends to hold a lot over the babies' heads. But who's the leader? Probably Tommy, right? See, these things aren't always associated. So, do leaders have power? Yes. But all of those that have power are not necessarily leaders. A leader is one who communicates to influence others to meet group goals and needs. They're any person identified by members of a group as a leader, or a person designated as a leader by election or appointment. So in all technicality, somebody who's using negative leadership could still be a leader. A villain could be a leader. A terrible leader is still a leader. So our conversations on leadership need to go further than who or what is a leader and talk about some of the best ways to lead. Before we do that, let's look at some different styles or types of leadership. There are two that I really want to note here. The first is a designated leader. This is a person appointed or elected to a position as leader of a small group. I don't know if any of you remember Captain Planet, but it was a show that aired in the 1990s. Captain Planet was an environmental hero. His whole goal was to save the planet. And he had a whole crew. I don't know if I remember them all. Earth, wind, fire, water, air, I believe. And each of them had their own special task. But Captain Planet, he was the designated leader because he was the one that led each of those individuals in the pursuit of the group's goals and using their own individual strengths to accomplish those goals. He was appointed as that leader. In other cases, there are emergent leaders. If you've ever watched Doug, you know that everybody kind of starts off on the same ground. It's like a leaderless setting, but one just emerges naturally, organically. It just feels right. They tend to take a leadership role. In terms of the group, you may have one of these two options. You may choose to designate a leader based on somebody volunteering, based on your group's ideas about who might have the best leadership skill set, or one may just emerge naturally. Or, spoiler alert, many may emerge. We're going to look at what this process looks like in groups. And we've got this rather complex model, and I'm going to attempt to explain it with clarity. This is the model of emergent leadership. And really, designated leaders are still usually emergent leaders as well. Even if they're appointed, they often emerge throughout the process, especially in contexts like the one that you're in this semester. Nobody's appointed the leader. One has to be determined. So some people want leadership, some don't. So we're going to break this down by 3 levels. Here we've got contenders. Everybody's a contender for leadership. Then we've got lieutenants and non-contenders, and I'll explain these in a second. So stage 1 is where we all begin. Stage 1 is where there are multiple contenders for the leadership position, and we're going to assume that there's just one. However, this shows that one person, person E, just straight up doesn't want to be the leader. They say, I'm too busy, I don't want to be the leader, or I'm not good in the leadership role. So they immediately become a non-contender. That's appropriate. Not everybody's cut out for leadership, not everybody wants it, not everybody has to want it. So they become a non-contender. They do not wish to be a leader. So then there are 4 contenders in stage 1. Now, stage 2 happens maybe after a few days, after a few weeks, after a few months. As the group tries to find its ground, starts to work through some tasks, it becomes obvious that some people are better suited for the leadership position over others. So here we see person E still hanging out as a non-contender, just straight up not interested in leadership. Persons A and C, they are still big contenders, people who are interested and qualified to serve in leadership role. But what happened to B and D? Well, they're here, and they become lieutenants. They've dropped from consideration from being a contender for leadership, and instead have allocated their support for certain individuals. So here we have person B advocating for person A, and person D advocating for person C. Now this could go a variety of different directions. Person B could advocate for A and then change their mind to C, vice versa. And what happens in stage 2 can be very complex and can change quickly. But ultimately, eventually we get to stage 3. Again, could be several months, could be several days, could be several hours, who knows. Where one person typically has emerged as the leader. Now this person doesn't have to be a stagnant leader. They could be a leader for any amount of time. It could be for one task. Here, we see person B still lending their support. They're the lieutenant. Think of them almost as the vice president. Likely as the group goes on, they're going to continue to ensure that person A feels the most supported. They're vice leader. And then person C, D, and E, they become non-contenders for leadership. Now their degree of participation in the group may vary. In fact, they could be up here. C and D could be lieutenants supporting A. This is just one hypothetical example. But as you develop leadership in your group, think about where you fall. Where did you enter? Were you a non-contender? Were you immediately a lieutenant? That could happen as well. Say, hey, I play second fiddle. Or were you a contender that dropped out? Think theoretically about the role of leadership emergence. It can help gussy up our understanding and can also be an important part of the process for validating the leadership that's in our groups. So let's talk about some of the characteristics of emergent leaders. We saw those people who emerge organically in groups, such as Doug, could have been you in your group. Let's talk about some of the characteristics. Number 1, they are self-monitoring. We've looked at self-monitoring, or we've called it mindfulness in Chapter 4 as well, pretty regularly in this course. Self-monitoring means that they're careful, they're cautious. They think about the words that they're saying, how they're going to be received, making sure that they validate everybody. Emergent leaders may not have one specific verbal style, but they use a verbal style that is best suited for the group. So it might be more supportive, or if the group needs to kind of get their butts in gear, it might be more direct. The book argues that psychological gender is important, that the best characteristics of emergent leaders are masculine communication characteristics. So those are characteristics defined by assertiveness and dominance. I argue that this is incorrect and outdated. I think it's pretty indicative of about late 1980s, early 1990s communication scholarship. I think more and more we're valuing the role of support, which has typically been seen as a feminine communication characteristic. And we don't mean these in terms of sex roles. We mean just the stereotypical words that have been assigned to these communication traits. So I take a little bit of an issue with that one, but the textbook mentions it, and who am I to question the textbook? So I included it here as well. And often the best emergent leaders are focused on the task, not at the consequence of interpersonal behaviors and focusing on the interpersonal, but they are focused on getting something done. Now, if you just straight up don't want to be a leader, that's okay. Let's talk about who shouldn't be a leader. Definitely those who miss meetings. You have to be an active part of your group. You know that this semester I've given you time, I've given you space, I've given you the appropriate venue to work in your groups, to have meetings so that you don't have to do too much outside of class. But those who miss meetings are showing a disrespect for the group, a disrespect for the process. Those people are not qualified to be leaders. Second, those who do not want to contribute or talk in meetings. You can't be a silent leader. Leaders have to be vocal. They have to sometimes say unpopular things. So if you're not a communicator, probably not best suited for leadership at this point. Next, those who actively volunteer for other roles. If somebody's volunteering to be the note taker, they probably don't want to be a leader, so don't appoint them as a leader. Those who do what they're told are not always best suited for leadership. Leaders need to be able to follow. We'll look at that in just one second. But they need to be able to buck against the trends a little bit as well. They need to be assertive and stand up and say, no, I just don't think that that's right. Those who are jerks, so sorry, you're not cut out for leadership either. You need to be able to buck against the trends, but you need to be able to do it in a supportive way. And it's important to show that you can follow. So if they show that they can't follow directions, then they shouldn't be a leader. Now, you might think that these kind of disagree with each other. Look at this fourth one. Those who do what they're told shouldn't be a leader, and those who can't follow shouldn't be a leader. Is that right? It is. There needs to be a careful balance. Leaders need to be able to follow, because if you haven't ever been a follower, how do you get followers? How do you get people to follow you if you haven't been in that position? They need to be able to do it, but they also need to be confident enough to buck against the trend and avoid groupthink as well. Now, there are several different approaches to leadership that we're going to really explore in depth. Those are traits-based leadership, styles-based leadership, functions-based leadership. There are contingency approaches, commutative competencies, leader-member exchange models, transformational leadership, and distributed leadership. And we're going to fly through these relatively quickly, and again, we're going to use cartoons to understand. So let's first jump into traits-based leadership. Traits approach says it's the approach to leadership that assumes that leaders have certain traits that distinguish them from followers or members of the group. This is a little bit of an outdated perspective. In the 1950s and 1960s, there's a lot of research that basically assumed that you were born a leader. You had characteristics or you didn't. And so a cartoon example that would support this would be Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. They had certain characteristics, i.e., they were turtles and they lived in the sewer. That separated them from the people that they were saving. They were uniquely qualified from birth to be in that leadership position. In the human world, though, this doesn't really hold true. So later developments then moved to a styles-based approach to leadership. And the assumption here is that a leader's style makes them more or less successful. Earlier, we looked at Rugrats and we said, well, who's the leader? Is it Tommy or is it Angelica? Because Tommy appears to be the leader, but Angelica appears to have the power. Well, different styles of leadership are appropriate during different times and different seasons of that group's life. Sometimes you need somebody powerful and direct to step in and take over. And sometimes you need a supportive person. So this approach says that leadership is really dependent on the style. And the style of the leader facilitates that group's goals in certain ways that may say, for one moment you're the leader, for the next you're another. Let's look at an example. So an autocratic style would say, start working on this project now. Leave the other one aside. Autocratic leaders are those who try to dominate and control a group. Completely on the flip side is the laissez-faire leader. Somebody who says, yeah, we'll decide whatever we want to work on, whatever. These are the do-nothing designated leaders, the whatever people. They provide minimal services to the group. Often these people think they're being helpful, but really they're being very unhelpful and they're being a hindrance. They're trying to be nice, but that niceness may be perceived as laziness. The best type of leadership is democratic leadership. Democratic leadership are egalitarian leaders who coordinate and facilitate discussions in small groups, and they encourage participation from all members. Democratic leaders ask a lot of questions. They seek to get everybody involved. So then beyond styles-based leadership, there is functions leadership. And the assumption here is that leadership is defined by the functions of a group's needs and can be supplied by any members. If you ever watched the Powerpuff Girls, you know that they're all part of a cohesive team, but they have unique traits. And so the context of a group, the context of a problem, may dictate that one do more work or emerge as the leader over another for a specific amount of time. This is all about functionality. So this is built on two assumptions. Number one, for any group to reach its goal, both task and social functions have to be performed. And two, the performance of these task and social functions is the responsibility of all group members. So really it's the group as a whole is the leader, and individuals in that group may emerge as a specific leader dependent on the context. Then there's contingency-based leadership. So contingency approaches, they stem from the studies of leadership studies, and they assume that the appropriate leadership style in a given situation depends on certain factors, such as members' skill sets, their knowledge, the time they have available, the type of task, and so forth. So this isn't necessarily based on the problem itself, although it may be. This is really based on the elements of the group. Think about Scooby-Doo. In certain cases, Scooby and Shaggy, stupid as they are the leaders, the ones who solve a problem because they're not afraid to dig through a trash can or hide in the woods and find something that the other group members would not. Other times, Velma and her incredible intellect are the reason the group's able to solve the mystery. So contingency-based approaches have the assumption that the best leadership scenario depends on group-related factors. And as groups change and members come and go, that may change as well. In the textbook, it notes that there are several different models of communication competency. You see Feidler's contingency model and Hersey and Blanchard's situational model. We're not going to cover those in too much depth, but one thing I do want to hit on is the communicative competency model, because these principles apply not only in context of leadership, but throughout the small group course or small group communication trajectory. So there are some assumptions in this model as well. Number one, this model assumes that good leaders communicate actively, clearly, and concisely. If you're seeking to gussy up your leadership skills, those are three communicative areas you can draw your attention to. This model assumes that good leaders communicate a good grasp of the group's task. The best small groups are constantly making known their purpose. They're saying, this is what we're supposed to do, keeping that task always in their mind. Good leaders inspire team members' confidence in themselves. Good leaders are validators. It's something I try to do with my team. I always try to validate them, make them feel appreciated, make them feel like what they're doing is important and accomplishing the greater goal of the group. Good leaders skillfully mediate information and ideas supplied by all members. So if two members of a group disagree, the leader's job is to kind of mediate between the two and say, I see what you're saying, that works here but not here. And then the other person, I see what you're saying, that works here and not here. Let's see if we can come to a mutual agreement. Good leaders express their opinions provisionally. So they provide their opinions, but there's a balance there as well. They don't dominate the conversation. They don't talk after every single element of a group meeting. They share, but they allow other people to share as well. Good leaders are not self-centered. They're not in leadership roles to get something out of it. They're in leadership roles because they're best suited for that role. Good leaders model a collaborative climate by respecting and supporting others. Again, going back to validating others, appreciating others. Good leaders promote celebration of diversity and sensitive diversity management. Good leaders seek to include people from different cultures and identities, and they value those things. They don't tolerate them, and they don't ignore them. And then good leaders share rewards and credit with their group. When the group succeeds, we all succeed. It's not about the leader. There are other models as well noted throughout the textbook. One is the leader-member exchange model, or LMX. And the assumption here is that leaders develop different kinds of leadership relationships with group members. And that's based on their own characteristics and the characteristics of group members. So I think of Hey Arnold. Arnold, clearly the leader in this show. And the relationship he has with people in his group, his circle of friends, varies greatly. In some cases, he's more direct, as with Helga. Other cases, he's more friendly, he's quiet, he's more of a participator, he's more of an observer. It depends. In small group interactions, this model says that the leader of a group is going to interact differently with each member. Now, this can promote the development of cliques within a group. It may be seen as favoritism, so it has to be carefully balanced. But in general, it's pretty true, because it's faulty to say that the leader has an equal relationship with everybody in the group. Remember, if we go back to the models earlier, those stages, there are contenders and lieutenants and non-contenders. How an emergent leader communicates with lieutenants who have supported them all along or have emerged to support them in a vice role is probably going to be a lot different than how they communicate with non-contenders. Textbook also notes transformational leadership, which is an assumption that leaders should empower group members to exceed expectations by rhetorically creating a vision that inspires and motivates others. Here again, we return to Captain Planet, who rhetorically motivated his cohort by showing what they were doing and how it related to improving the overall nature of the planet. So there's a bigger sense of vision here. We want people to really see a vision, and they encourage their group members to just go above and beyond what they were designed to do. Then there is distributed leadership, which is an assumption where the whole group is responsible for the success of the group. All members provide leadership. So it's again based on some of those other types of leadership like functions and contingency-based leadership, but really there's no necessarily one leader. We're all leaders. And I've seen cases in the past in this small group communication course where this has worked for small groups. They don't have a designated leader. I do strongly suggest you appoint one person who is responsible, but know that distributed leadership is going to happen whether or not you agree that it's your leadership model you choose or not. And then there's the leader as completer. And the assumption here is that leaders should function primarily as a participant. They don't really dictate, they don't really do anything aside from monitor the group's progress, notice what's missing, and provide help when needed. Same thing goes with the Magic School Bus. Miss Frizzle, she was a little bit of an observer. Yeah, she got them on their adventures and their field trips, but she let the students just kind of feel it out, come to their own conclusions, and then, if she needed to insert herself, she would. This model works particularly well. It can be hard for people who feel that they're leaders because they have to take more of a backseat approach, but it can be validating to other group members. On one hand, they have the comfort of knowing that there is a leader who is responsible, but they also feel that they can assume a semi-leadership role as well because the leader is just another participant in that group. There are loads of leadership theories, not just the ones we've mentioned here. These ones are especially important for small group communication. Please make sure that you understand them in depth. We're going to apply some of these in class in a little bit of a unique way, but make sure you're well versed in traits, styles, and theories of leadership as we move forward throughout the semester. Take some of this stuff, apply it to your own experience in your small group. As always, make sure that you have submitted a study guide for this lecture. Make sure you submit it in a timely fashion, and if you have any questions, please let me know. Until next time, thanks for watching.